is what is universal screening? We talked about it, that it is a process of systematically seeking early warning signs of a later problem. So it is predictive. What we don't want to do is we don't want to wait until the student is in deep, dire need of help. We want to intervene early. So universal screening is something that we really recommend early educators and even early childhood centers and people look at. So what are those things that are indicative of students having good language skills and good pre-reading skills and reading skills? So screening systems also must be an assessment for all students in the population. So again, we want to screen everybody. They should be efficient. One of the things we want to do is, because we want to stop and take a look at all students, we don't want to take a lot of time away from our activities and our instruction and our engagement of working with students, but we want to be very efficient in how we do that. We also want to make sure that they measure the right warning signs and that they should be linked to instructional priorities. So when we talk about measuring the right warning signs, we need to understand what are the most critical components that students need to be able to do to be good readers. Those are the things that we should also be measuring and screening for, because we know that they are necessary in reading development, but we also know that those are the things that we can teach. So we don't want to be screening things that we can't impact, because while it might be useful information, we can't do anything with it. So we want to keep that whole linking to instruction in the forefront of our mind. So then let's talk about what makes an assessment diagnostic, because we talked about a great need to screen all students, right? So we can identify who are those students who are at risk. We want to monitor their progress, but when they aren't making adequate progress, we want to go in and we want to be able to really identify what is occurring with the student. So we want to make sure that specific skills are assessed that align with specific skills that need to be taught. So again, that direct link of, if I'm going to test it, is it something I can teach? That's really important to keep in mind. So some target skills that we know are necessary for reading, like phonics skills, but what are the most common patterns and words that we want to be able to evaluate? So does it include a continuum of skills? So for example, if we are interested in word reading and phonics, and we are looking at a small unit, like a consonant, vowel, consonant, or CVC pattern, is that the only thing it assesses? Or does it also go up and get into more complex word patterns that would be shown through testing multisyllabic words? We also want to know if it's really diagnostic, then we have to make sure that the assessment is giving students more than one chance to respond. So the student has to have multiple opportunities to respond so that we can say with high assurance, yes, the student is having a problem, or no, we don't. So lots of times we use, it has to be greater than chance, right? So you can't just give them one opportunity or even two, but if they have 3 opportunities to do something, based on that, that observation, how has the student performed? The other thing is, we want to, in order for it to be diagnostic, we want to understand how is the student, how is their performance evaluated or scored. So is it scored at an error level? So for example, if we're looking at phonics and we're asking them to read word patterns, whether they're real words or nonsense words, are we just marking that whole word wrong? Or are we able to go in and say, actually, within this pattern, this is where they are making some errors? So questions to ask that help us inform our instruction, because remember, we don't want to test anything unless we know we can influence it through our teaching. So for reading, we know that we want to look at phonological awareness, at phonics, at fluency, vocabulary, comprehension. We also want to then figure out, so what data or information do we have that helps confirm this? We're going to show you some information on the next slide. And then within that, there are some things we want to understand. So which skills does a student have mastered? Which skills are they still learning, and which skills actually need to be taught. So I love this visual, and this comes from the Hill for Literacy, which is a consulting group here on the East Coast, although they do work all over the country. And they have this beautiful representation that they use when they talk about assessments within the continuum of foundational skills. So they look at what are all of those skills that students need to be developing, and what are the assessments that schools can use to check in to make sure that the student is continuing on their growth to becoming a good reader. So if you look at the blue boxes, it looks at some very basic foundational skills, but then it moves up. So it starts with letter identification, phonemic awareness, moves up to letter sounds. Then we get into blending and automaticity of putting words together, decoding beyond CVC, and then we need to start talking about our fluency and accuracy and our automaticity. Then we start moving into our fluency with expression, with prosody, which really starts focusing on our comprehension and building our vocabulary and writing. So all of those things have to be occurring. And then we have to think about, so what are the assessments that we're using to help us understand how the student is progressing across those layers of reading development? So what they have in this slide is, I believe these are some of the, from Dibbles or lots of other CBM measures that you might be familiar with, whether you're using AimsWeb or FastBridge or EasyCBM, they all have very similar features. And so it shows you where those come in. But one of the things to think about is when you think about phonics, right? So let's go back and think about, when you think about the simple view of reading and the Scarborough rope, we know that reading words is such a necessary foundational skill. So it's not something that just happens. Words are complex. Phonics patterns are very expansive. They start with very, simple phoneme grapheme representations all the way up into very complicated multi-syllabic word patterns. And students really need to have a good foundation across all of those phonics skills. So you have to think about, how are we actually going to be able to assess this piece of students' word learning development to ensure that they are well on their way to being proficient readers. And again, we know that students with dyslexia often struggle with this layer right here.